So the entry point in terms of my own thinking about land-based research came from the ways in which I was learning about and learning from Indigenous scholars and community knowledge holders and community leadership around concepts of wellness and well-being. And so that was really within a framework of a foundational research belief that the wellness of our communities can't be divorced from the wellness of the land and waters. And so if that's something that, you know, is a real framework in terms of how I'm understanding community wellness and community wellness leadership and governance, then the ways in which I go into learning about that must also include a meaningful and authentic relationship to land, waters, and place. And so in my own research practice, which is entitled Land as Body, in the conversations, the guided conversations that I had with the co-researchers, the only question that I asked for them in terms of how we had our conversation was that it could be on the land and on the waters and in a place of their choice, in a place that feels authentic and meaningful for them. And essentially it created the opportunity to situate our learnings and to situate the actual research and the conversations and everything that came out of that in the context that was meaningful and authentic, centering the land and relationship to land and waters at the core of our methodologies and of our research is important for many different reasons. And one of the reasons includes that for many Indigenous students, I think, and staff and faculty and folks who are doing work within university institutions, we often find ourselves, at least I know I find myself, trying to shapeshift and feel and think through, how can I fit into this space? How can I speak in a way that is reflective of this institution? And I don't necessarily think that's aligned with our community's conceptions of well-being and wellness, and so there's a discrepancy there. Then I think inevitably we are required to remove our bodies from an institution and from the walls that contain traditional classrooms, and we locate our thinking and our learning and our critical reflections and our heart-centered work on the land and on the waters. So we're really taking our bodies outside of the classroom, and that challenges us in different ways.
What does land-based research mean to me? Well, it means that in the process of doing research, we are on the land and embracing the concept is embracing the teachings and the wisdom of the land itself. I tended to look at it as the land being the mother, being the teacher. And so when I do land-based research, I'm thinking about my responsibilities with the land, and then how I'm walking on the land, and the processes and procedures and protocols that comes with that. And so when I'm doing research with land-based research, I'm thinking about the connections, the living and non-living beings that are actually providing, the pathways for me to do the work. For example, I work with a lot of medicines, plant medicines. My work is centered around health and wellness for Indigenous communities, specifically for Indigenous youth in urban spaces. I think that's the gaze and the scope of my work. I've been always interested into that. But the knowledge and wisdom and the healing is actually coming from the land itself, is that active engagement with the land in a good way. Land with capital L, the living mother that provides us with, the nourishment that we needed to carry on the work. My connection with land base is the connection with my grandparents. I'm a Guarani Kaiwa, I descend from the Guarani Kaiwa nation from the middle west of Brazil, a mix of Mozambican and Portuguese. And I grew up with my grandparents, and they were folks from the land. I learned to identify plants and making medicine as a young child. I learned my 101 plant walks around the house because that's what we had. My grandfather, actually specifically, his medicine was star medicine, so his work was with the stars and then the plants. And so witnessing those processes, I suppose, as a kid, that was just a normal thing that happens. But then at the same time, it provided me with a kind of a framework of, I guess, like a deeper understanding of the, how our relatives, our plants, our animals, the feather ones, the fin ones, the four-legged ones, we're all in this together, and we needed to look after each other. I often remember my grandmother used to say, a funny thing, you can't translate to English, but it was something like that. Do not, I guess the translation is do not waste water. But she was put in a different context, is that water as a source of medicine, keep us well and alive, and we have to have a respect and relationship with that water, that we have to be very mindful when we walk with it, when we drink it, when we play with it, because it's us. And because the water is then part of every other living beings around. And so the living entity of the water lives within everything. But as a young child, and even in my preteen, wasn't something that I was interested in. I was not interested in that kind of stuff. I wanted to go to the big city because that was a place where the action was. My peers, and it took quite a while for me to kind of, it's like a full circle to come back to it, because it was only in my late 30s that actually at the University of Victoria and studying with Nancy Turner, that I was re-inspired to kind of reconnect with that sort of essence of my being, which was the connection with plant medicine in the way I'm doing it now.
Well, I guess I always been interested on the land, so because I'm a botanist. I was trained as a botanist, so I started being a botanist, but then also I got interested in people. So it was first land, it was first plants, and then interest in people, and then the two things together brought me back to the land. I got interested in the land because that's where our food comes from, that's where our medicines come from, and we see the land as a teacher, we see the land as a relative, and it was a place to build community, basically, right? And it was a place where I could think about multiple ways and multiple dimensions of learning, teaching, and also research. I think that now that I have made that transition, I feel that there's no way back. We are on the traditional territories of Muslim people. We have this opportunity to open up space and hold the space at the UBC farm. So we started small, but eventually it has become a place of community, a place of transformative education, a place where it has all these dimensions of social, but also personal level. It's a place to grow personally. So I see land-based education not just or land-based research more as a way of life. As a way where you can bring together your family, your research, your work, your learning. So it's that simple in some ways. Over the years, I think that my personal experience with land-based education and research it has quite allowed me to reassess my priorities as a researcher, as an educator, and as an indigenous person. It has been a place where I have been able to explore areas that I was not aware of the power of the experiences that I could gain and access through engaging with the land. And it's not, we are actually always on the land, even if we're walking on concrete or in the streets or of the big cities. You know. But when we talk about land-based research or land-based learning, I guess we go a little deeper than that because we are able to.
My own relationship to land and to waters as a visitor on another person's and on other nations' territories informed my own work is through my master's program within Indigenous governance and my community governance project, which was under the supervision of the Sartlip First Nation Garden Project. And so in my master's program, there was a lot of new information and a lot of new language. I had actually never heard the term decolonization before, and the first day of class I called home and I was like, "Dad, we need to decolonize." And he was like, "Speak street to me, Erynne. I have no idea what that means." And I was like, "I don't think I do yet either, but I will." But there was a lot of new language and I was trying to, I feel like, really catch up with what I was being told were important words and terminologies and language to describe our experiences and interrogation with colonization and how it informs our current realities. And it was this really fast-paced learning space that I was really struggling to keep up with. And it wasn't until my course load ended after the year and I had the rest of the year to then shift into my community governance project, which was with the Sartlip First Nation Garden Project. And it wasn't until this one moment I had when I was working in a specific garden. I was planting peas actually, and it was a very detailed process of hours of planting peas in a really specific way. And I realized as I was kind of in that place of working my hands into the land and learning about what my own accountabilities and my own relationships are, that I really had the opportunity for all of the teachings that I received in my mind to shift its way down to my heart and to allow for that heart space to inform my action. And so for that, I am grateful that I had the opportunity to have that reflective space on the land and in relationship to Wasanich territories specifically, and to think about all of these big questions and all of these big terms in a way that was felt and in a way that was embodied. And I know that I've never had that experience within a traditional classroom setting. I get wrapped up and I do stay in my head, and inevitably when I stay in my head space, it doesn't necessarily translate to transformation and personal growth and becoming, my own conscious becoming. And so I really recognize the role that the land had and has as a teacher, and the roles that the waters have in carrying that knowledge. And by physically, mentally, and emotionally, and in many ways spiritually situating our learning on the land, I believe that it can move beyond our headspace into our heart and into the actual relationships that we talk about and that we dissect and that we categorize within the academy.
The methodology that I use on the land is the practical application of what I have spoke before. It's grounded on indigenous ways of knowing, that is centered on knowledge, wisdom, that is shared through this intergenerational knowledge sharing that supports the activation or the enactment of indigenous work. It's grounded on, ethics, indigenous ethics, and then I like to think, and also acknowledge, the ethics of the land is that relationship of reciprocity, is that relationship of caring, of respect and reverence, and is the wisdom that emanates from those interactions, from those relationships, is relational, um, and so, and, to clarify, indigenous knowledges are not something that is static. That you know, it is a living systems of knowledges that moves to places and spaces and is contextual. So when I think about indigenous methodologies in that sense, is the application of that knowledge to the specific place and space, is contextual within the territories of the land the person is, or in this case here, I'm bringing in, I'm really looking at indigenous ways of knowing of the Coast Salish folks around this region here, specifically the Musqueam, for example, the acknowledgement of the land, the territoriality is grounded on that place. So then there is a place of departure. So we can actually then investigate or interact with, the questions we have at hand, but it's centered within that basket of knowledge, contextualized within the territory we're in.
Being a land-based researcher, it just, I think, opens a wider range of opportunities and methodologies. And the land is more practical for indigenous people to use indigenous methodologies, of course, like talking circles, interviewing with elders, participatory action research, all these methodologies that have been emerging over the last couple of decades. So we are allowed, we are more flexible, and I think that land-based research applies to all disciplines. It's just a matter of finding the appropriate frameworks. Because I do social research, I do research with plants, I do botany, I do control of weeds in certain ways, but at the same time we apply a lot of methodologies that are related to orality, and expressions of orality, and that means performance and songs and recounting dreams or recounting genealogies. So it's a place for mixed methods. It's a place for mixed methodologies, from qualitative methodologies to quantitative methodologies. So I wouldn't say that there are specific methodologies. It's more the desire to apply a given methodology to the quest for knowledge, right? So if you're a mathematician, I think you could do land-based mathematics. If you are an artist, you could do land-based music or land-based carving. If you are interested in chemistry, you could do land-based chemistry. So it's the notion of being on the land that it is richer than being in the classroom. Usually, as indigenous people, when we are getting ready to engage to do the work for that day on land, on a given space, we need to prepare ourselves. A way to give thanks, and to ask permission to the land and the space to allow you to do the good work that you're going to do today or tomorrow. Even the notion of times also are different when you are on the land. So because you're depending on the elements, on the weather or the seasons. So land-based allow you to synchronize your life in some ways with the cycle of life. It might be snow, rain, it might be the summer sun, or it might be the night or the evening. So it's all those different elements that usually are not taken in account in a classroom that has fluorescent lights, for example. Is that element that make research in a way a sacred practice almost, right? Where you give yourself to the process and you trust the process that everything is going to be fine. So I think that there are some distinctions in a way, but we always searching again, which is in some ways to myself the word research means like we have to look again, we have to look with different lenses and with different tools. So the land provide to us different tools, different methods, different practices to discover the knowledge that is, just on the land itself.
Advice that I would offer to other students, and including advice that I offer to myself again and again, is that we are learners, and think of a time where you feel safe, you feel comfortable, you feel excited and respected and eager to learn. When I think of those times, I'm most often in relationship with the land and waters, because I recognize that as the land grows and changes and shapeshifts through time and through space, and who takes on different forms and who co-creates, its own relationship to water and to all of its different pieces and elements, that's also reflective of how I authentically learn. Reflective of learning is ongoing. So, be gentle with yourself, and, know that we will transform. So it's one thing to say our well-being can't be divorced from the well-being of the land and waters. And that's what really situates us, Indigenous communities, as optimal leaders when talking about restoring and transforming our relationship to land and waters. It's one thing to say these things, but it's another thing to really embody these things. And so for students, we're not really, and a lot, especially in non-Indigenous learning spaces, we're not asked to consider our relationship to land and waters in the work that we do. But I would say hold on to that, protect that, and let that be a foundational place of your own learning, because our relationship to land and waters is what defines our identity. And our identity is what defines our responsibilities and our accountabilities. And so the land and the waters and relationship to land and waters, whether that's in your own self-care practice or whether that's actually embedded in your research model, is something that I think that you should claim, you should take up, and you should protect, because you have a right to as an Indigenous learner.
Check in with I guess to check in with their communities and check in with the elders, or check in with themselves. I guess to inquire about why they're doing that work, what is in it for the community, for themselves. Is it going to benefit? What's the benefit of that? Checking in where they are at. Where is this work is taking place, which I think is very relevant. Because I think as an Indigenous person doing Indigenous research, I often think about other Indigenous people. I think about my community, first and foremost, because I'm not doing it to fill up a shelf of books or for other reasons than it is actually to support the people who I connected with and support, in the Indigenous healing. I think that's a big part of it, in the big scope of things. But how are we doing that? How do we enter that conversation? How can we contribute? Because I think in the making and visioning and imagining and dreaming, I think we have to be there, not only ourselves. We have to think about in a more collective way, because land-based work is community-based. I think we are, as a collective, as Indigenous people, from all directions, specifically impacted by the colonial history that really pushed really hard to take us away, to remove us from our centers, from our cultures, from our language, or didn't succeed. in that process, I think a lot of hurt has, come out of that, and it hasn't ended. And so I think healing, I think indigenous work, and I think the center of indigenous work, specific land-based work, is around that. Whether it's the healing of the people of the land, is central to our identity, our feeling good, or feeling healthy, and feeling proud of ourselves, and achieving your self-determination or sovereignty. And a big part of it is this beautiful living earth.
So my entry point into lands-based research, I'll have to repeat that.
That's okay.
It takes me a minute. Okay. Hey! Film, hey, holy.
I'll do bloopers at the end.
Oh, so. Okay.
It's about the land.
The land. I wish the camera caught that.
We're like, you want to talk too,
Just
right?
reminding us.
Yeah, be like, the land.
Oh man, I'm so nervous.
That's
with
okay.
this.
Don't be nervous. I have like 3 hours of footage, so and
Okay,
it's totally fine.
I'm sorry, I'm giving more work for your son. Sorry.
no, we'll just skip that whole part. It's
Okay.
totally fine.
Okay, amazing.
Turning more into land-based education, land-based research for the last probably 15 years ago. And we were fortunate to have the opportunity
Thanks. That was great.
I rambled in a headspace, and it would inevitably inform the ways. Oh,
That's okay.
is that a squirrel?
Ais gihewini pamatisuin, parachi itatamayak, hai, nipiani, kawiyumaski. The wellness of our peoples cannot be divorced from the wellness of the land and waters. For Indigenous women, from coast to coast, pathways towards a balanced mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being requires a meaningful and culturally grounded relationship to land and waters. When we are well, we are not only better equipped to care for our families and communities, but also to take up our responsibilities to protect the land and waters, which hold our languages, governance protocols, and cultural rights. However, current efforts in the fields of Indigenous health wellness research and political governance research are often regarded as separate disciplines, separating the personal from the political and the body from the governance. How then can relationship to land and water inform personal healing, health leadership, and governance practice in relationships to self, other, spirit, and land? In a research project entitled Land as Body, Indigenous Women's Leadership, Land-Based Wellness, and Embodied Governance, we identify 4 principles of wellness leadership and self-determined governance. They include spirit and culture, creative resurgence, relational accountability, and kitaskinaoipi, kiskinohomakoya. Knowledge comes from the land. Within a framework of experienced or embodied governance, the teachings gained contribute to both the theoretical and practical efforts towards health equity, community well-being, and personal governance, resounding into the futurity for generations to come.